Hey, everybody, welcome to this Think Big exclusive. I'm looking forward to having a very timely conversation with Carolyn Grant Normandin, who's the regional director of the Michigan Anti-Defamation League, ADL. You're responsible for leading ADL's Michigan regional office, which focuses on combating anti-Semitism and bigotry of all kinds through advocacy, community service, and anti-bias education. Carolyn, thanks so much for being on with me today. I think this is such a perfect time to talk to you with all of the news that is going on with so much hate speak. I don't want to give energy to certain elements of it, so I'm going to kind of keep it to the hate speak piece. And let's start by talking about what the ADL does.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast, John.
Yeah.
So the ADL is an anti-hate organization. We are a civil rights organization that's been around since 1913. Our mission has always been to fight anti-Semitism and to combat, support justice for all groups. So our mission has never changed in more than 100 years. It's had its ups and downs. We have supported all types of civil rights actions with amicus briefs, and we speak out against hate all the time. We work with law enforcement when an incident of hate occurs. A lot of times when an incident of hate occurs, if it's an assault or vandalism or something, police are already involved. But if it's an incident of hate speech or an incident that happens to a person that doesn't reach the level of a hate crime, or it happens in a school, that's when we're called in. So ADL is in the unusual business of being able to track incidents of hate as well. Not all the incidents that we track are crimes, but every crime that is sent to us is an incident of hate also. About half of the incidents that we review and try and ameliorate are anti-Jewish or anti-Semitism. And the other half are a mixture of anti-Jewish, anti-Black, anti-gay, anti-Asian. It falls into a big bucket. I would say last year my office reviewed 263 different incidents of hatred. That was up dramatically, and we could talk about why those numbers have gone up. But
we will talk about
we will talk about 263. That's more than that's several times a week.
Let's I love there's an old saying, if you don't bring data to the meeting, then people will just use their own opinion. And so as we dive into this conversation, because I think there are opinions of people when it comes to anti-Semitism, anti-hate of everything you spoke about, I think sometimes people don't understand what those numbers really look like, right? And so as somebody who is Jewish myself, and I know you are too, sometimes the numbers don't tell the full story, but what can you share from a data perspective so people can just, part of the goal for me of this podcast is to raise awareness. And I think numbers can kind of raise that awareness.
Okay. So first of all, ADL has been tracking numbers for more than 40 years. We started out with tracking numbers of anti-Semitism, and that's what we've been doing for more than 40 years. We now have opened it up in the last several years to anybody can call and tell us about any incident. And last year, as I mentioned, we've tracked incidents of anti-Asian sentiment, racism, all kinds of things. So nationally, the numbers have been going up and up and up in the last 5, 6, 7 years. You see dips in anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred over the years. But for the longest time, since 9/11, anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry outside the connection to, Islamophobia, but right around 9/11, of course, Islamophobia went up really, really high. But generally speaking, we had seen numbers going down and down and down, and then they started to go up. Last year, across the country, it was the single largest number across the country that since ADL has been tracking these numbers. In Michigan, our numbers have never, ever not gone up in the last, since I've been here, I've been here almost 5 years. And so for the last 5 years, I've watched the numbers go up year over year. And those are only things that get reported to my office. So let's talk a little bit about what we do with, when a call comes in or an email comes in. Or
Well, before we get to what a call comes in, why do you think both those numbers that you just shared? Why do you think? What's the ADL's perspective based on research and intel that you have?
I lay it at the doorstep of three main things. So the rise of social media, ignorance in terms of the farther we get away from like the Holocaust or something, the less people know about it. And the political and human divisiveness in the world right now. This is not just a Michigan problem. It is not just a United States problem. It is a world problem. And you see it coming from all over. You see it coming from the left. You see it coming from the right. Anti-Semitism in particular is always at the forefront of any type of hatred. And it has been that way for millennia. So, and it comes from everywhere. It's not just, one person, one party. It's not that. We see it coming from all over. When you see things that are fearful, make people fearful, like the COVID-19 pandemic, whenever you see people have more fear, you see rises of anti-Semitism and rises of hatred. We kind of call anti-Semitism the canary in the coal mine because you see it connected. And people are fearful and they lash out. They're looking for a scapegoat, a reason to blame. So, the global pandemic is part of it. But I would say the rise of social media is the number one thing that I can point to, as well as this sort of no one having a philosophical discussion where they can agree to disagree. It's, I don't agree with you, therefore you're a Nazi. I don't agree with you, you're using Gestapo tactics. So I think this kind of divisiveness that we've seen, not only in Michigan, not only in the US, but all over the world, has fueled sort of this rise in hatred and bigotry. I also want to mention the numbers that we track very closely to FBI crime statistics. So you see, I mentioned at the beginning that, people call police when a crime has occurred. But when you look at hate crimes and hate crimes data that is reported to the FBI, you see this same rise in the last several years.
Wow. Let's talk a little bit about the ADL. You were about to say, what we do when we answer the phone. But one of the things I'd like to dive into when it comes to everything that you and your organization do, not only locally, but nationally, is it's sometimes I think people might think that the ADL comes in and you see them on all the news channels when there are hate crimes or hate speak. But I want to really understand, and I think it's important for the listeners to understand, how do you, come out and defend and share the ADL thoughts? And then how do we educate and begin to change the ignorance? Because those are two totally different things. And it seems like the ADL a lot of times is, out defending and educating when there's a hate crime. But then it goes kind of, silent until until the next hate crime. And so how do we change it through education when people are coming to the table with certain ignorances and lineage that they've learned at the kitchen table?
I'm really glad you asked that question. So I should have started by saying ADL does three main things. We advocate, we educate, and we investigate. We started talking about the numbers. So that's sort of the investigate. And I use that term loosely. We are not the police. Let's talk about the advocacy and the education. So you touched on it a little bit. One of the first things that we do is we try and advocate on behalf of everyone. It's why we file cards of opposition when we think there are bills in the House or the Senate in Michigan or in Congress that are bad for civil rights. We speak to all types of community groups. You do not have to be Jewish to have an ADL speaker at your house of worship. I've spoken at many churches, at school board meetings, at community meetings. So, and that goes into the education. We also do a tremendous amount of education within the state of Michigan, all over the state. This morning, the education director and I were on the phone with a department head for a school up in Petoskey, and we're going to do some programming there talking about anti-Semitism and the rise of anti-Semitism. And it's going to also talk about bias and what happens in terms of, any type of bias and bigotry. We also have a really cool program that is free to any school that wants it. It's called No Place for Hate. It is a student-led, student-driven program. We give students the opportunity and some tools to figure out how they want to change the climate in their school. So they can work on racism, they can work on support for Indigenous people, they can work on support for people with disabilities. There's a school we're working on, and this year they're working on talking about body shaming. So whatever the student group wants to do, that's what No Place for Hate will help them kind of change the climate and make certain that the campus, we do everything we can to ameliorate hate on campus. So the education piece is so crucial, and it's really what we get jazzed about.
Yeah, let's. I want to dive into that a little bit more because I love your organization. I think it's an incredible organization, and you're talking about schools, but I want to talk about I typically interview people about business, and so I want to just kind of, how many businesses are reaching out to the ADL proactively, consistently, to bring people in from the ADL to educate their companies, and what responsibilities do the companies have, right? So I love the idea about going into the schools and getting them when they're younger and things of that nature. But let's talk about the businesses and their responsibility as a business owner to educate just, no place for hate.
Well, that's also a great question. You did your homework. I would have to say that. My office is available to anybody that wants it. So we've done for businesses, law firms, companies. We worked with a coffee shop. We've worked with big businesses, small businesses. Starting in the next 4 weeks, we have a program called Shine a Light, where we're focusing on corporate America. And that will be maybe another discussion we could have on what we ask businesses to do during the time of Hanukkah, and really shining a light on some of these issues. But generally speaking, businesses are also struggling. When I talk about the divisiveness of the community, it trickles into the business. So we have had incidents reported about anti-Semitism at a car company in a bathroom. And then they sometimes they contact us. Sometimes we contact them. We have spoken with the Michigan, the Oakland County the Oakland County General Administration offices, and presented programs on general bias. We've worked with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. And so companies call us all the time, and they usually say, we're hearing that our folks are unclear, not sure what to do with what's going on with the political divisiveness. Sometimes it's because of an incident that has gotten national attention. Sometimes it's just their normal, DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion activities, or an employee resource group that wants to understand either more about the ADL, or more about anti-Semitism, or more about what we do to help people understand microaggressions, for example. That's a very, very large topic that we're called in all the time and said, can you do a program for our employees on what is a microaggression and why does it tear at the fabric of the morale around here? And so we do work like that. And business is really important. Number one, your employees have to be, the ones that face the public really have to be understanding and understand what some of the trigger points are for a microaggression. And by that, I'll just describe it.
Can you define it for someone who's listening and doesn't know what that is, please?
My mother, she should rest in peace, would have called it a backhanded compliment.
Okay.
It's something like, oh, Carolyn, you speak very well for a woman, or saying to a person of color, you know, were you the first person in your family to go to college? Now, it may be true that the person was the first person in their family to go to college. It may be true that hopefully I speak well, but is that related to what they were trying to say was, I really thought your words were really remarkable, or I really think you're educated. But they say it in such a way that their internal biases come forward, and it's like a smack across the face. And what it does to the person who's hearing it, they miss the compliment because they're stinging from the way it was delivered. Now, we also at ADL talk about intent. And most people who are giving you a compliment are not intending to hurt you. But with just a little bit of an understanding of some of your own internal biases and taking a look at what's above the surface and what's below the surface, a 90-minute session with, a group of people can really help them understand what it is that could make their coworker feel comfortable. This comes up a lot with transgender communities and people who don't know how to address someone. And so really understanding what a pronoun is and why is it important to address a person with their proper name and their proper pronoun. Those are things that help make the world and business a better place.
Yeah.
I also would mention that we also talk about, in terms of schools, these schools that are very, very homogenous. They have the same, whether it's all Black, all white, whether it's all Jewish, not Jewish at all. Those schools, especially the seniors that are going to graduate, going off to universities, they're going off to, maybe universities in different states. They're going to internships. They'll be doing, study abroads. They also have to have those skills that are really crucial to helping business survive.
Yeah. Let's talk about intent for a little bit. I love that word because I think, like you're talking about, a microaggression can just be somebody who's uneducated, ignorant, needs to be educated. And then we can see a transformation and an evolution. And we can see it in an individual, and we can see the ripple effect within a company when a group like you, the ADL comes in and really educates and gives people those kind of aha moments. So I'm a big believer that, positive intent and things that are positive compound in a way, and things done with a negative intent can also compound, unfortunately, in a very aggressive way. And so what we're seeing right now in the news is what I would perceive, or I'd like to know what the ADL would perceive, the newest kind of, intent that we're seeing from Kanye West. It's very, very blatant. And I think sometimes there's, I've been following things and people communicating on, these people dropped and these companies dropped, but maybe Adidas didn't drop fast enough. And what was their intent? What's this company's intent? What was Kanye's intent? So what is it? Unpack that for us, please.
First of all, I applauded Adidas for the decision to end its partnership with Kanye West.
Yeah.
We've seen many companies do that. If somebody doesn't hit their company image, they drop them.
Yeah.
This particular thing has been it's been going on longer than most of these big efforts, usually a couple of days and then they're done. This one keeps going because Kanye West keeps doubling down and saying, no, I am right. And he is not, he's refusing to even consider that what he's saying is anti-Semitic. It is so anti-Semitic and so hateful. And he's egging people on to incite violence.
Yeah.
And that is very problematic.
Wait, I want to unpack that a little bit more,
yes.
because I think with the level of influence he has, I saw something and I didn't fact check this, but I saw it on social media that, he has 5 million followers and there's only 15 million Jews. And
yes.
so when it comes to, egging on and influence, there, I think, are some people, because his brand is so big, they look at it and say he couldn't possibly be anti-Semitic. And so just unpack from you just said it's absolutely anti-Semitic to those who are hearing it and saying, but how could it be?
Well, first of all, my information, and I believe it's been fact checked, is he has 31 million worldwide followers.
Okay.
31 million. He also has all kinds of tentacles because of his merchandise. There are people walking around with his merchandise. For the last several years, a lot of his lyrics have been problematic. I have millennials. My kids are, millennials, and they understand it. They hear these tropes, these age-old tropes: Jewish power, Jewish money, Jewish greed. All of those things have roots that are hundreds of years old. And the words that he says matter. So if they're part of a lyric of the song, okay, they're part of a lyric of a song. But when he goes out and says, I want to go DEFCON, it wasn't DEFCON. I think I don't know what was in his head. But when he says that and says, I am going to go DEFCON on the Jews, and he urges people to do that. And then other groups, white supremacist groups, we know who they are. We follow them. I'm not going to mention their names. You mentioned at the beginning, we're not going to give oxygen to these groups. But ADL has backgrounders on every single group. Anybody on this podcast can go to adl.org and look up any group that they think we're talking about, which there are many, and we know their methods of operation. So the idea of going to a freeway overpass and dropping a sheet down that says Kanye was right, the Jews must die, that's insightful. That is, people are following what he says. So why am I concerned about it? Yes, it's his reach. Yes, it's that he has such a powerful hold on people. Yes, that he has not at all opened up a door that said, hey, maybe I need to be educated. He has doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down, and he's inciting other people to go with him. And you can see other groups, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar comes out immediately and starts talking. There are many voices that have called for Kanye West's rhetoric to stop. And I guess we should be calling him Ye. But I mean, that's his name. So let's call him by his name.
Yeah.
But the idea that the overpass says Kanye is right, that is proof positive that hate breeds more hate.
Yeah.
And then when you take this little device and you put it in the hands of a young person who may be in 15, 16 years old, maybe they're not millennials, maybe they're in high school, and they go out and they do the same thing or they say the same things, that's breeding more hatred.
Yeah.
And that's what concerns me tremendously. I would also say that there are people that have not been canceled. Look at Nick Cannon. I believe in council culture. I don't believe in cancel culture. And as a Jewish person, we just celebrated Yom Kippur. I mean, that's a day of repentance. So there's always a chance for somebody to turn a corner. And you see, Nick Cannon, he made a very, very serious error in the same general light. It was very anti-Semitic. He started to be called out. He immediately went and talked to rabbis. He talked to people at ADL. He educated himself. And I don't have any animus towards Nick Cannon. He's a person who has understood the point of view. But if somebody is saying, I am not going to even think about this, and I'm going to continue to say it, that's very problematic.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for kind of walking us through that. I want to dive into a little bit more about council culture, because I too just celebrated Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and many some of the sermons that I listened to, they were all about forgiveness and things of that nature. But how do you, once someone goes through a reformed process and is counseled, how do you let it go? And what is their responsibility to the community or the public to kind of, to bring a certain additional awareness of their newfound light?
So if it's a celebrity and they've been so vocal, they need to be equally as vocal with their understanding. That's number one. And immediately start making amends to what they've said and written. You know, nothing, this thing will live forever. You know, so, you know, people, there are often times that somebody has said something and 2 years later, it gets reported to my office as a new incident. And then I will have to say, this is not a new incident. This happened 2 years ago. This is what we did. And this is how the incident played itself out. But the internet and social media is an echo chamber, and it can go around the world several times and seem new. So number one, the way you disseminate it out, you have to come back with publicly saying over and over again what you've learned and how you've learned it. That's from the perspective of the person who perpetrated it, right? From the person who heard it or was targeted. I think the honest and open conversations are hard ones. And those are, if it wasn't a celebrity and it was your brother-in-law's next door neighbor who said, I Jewed this guy down. And you'd have to say, you know, when you say that, it's offensive to me, and here's why. It's an old anti-Semitic trope about Jewish people's money. And it comes from the inability of Jewish people to own property. And so they were tax collectors or they were merchants. I am not a person who is trying to cheat someone or take their money. So when you say the phrase, I Jewed him down, that is offensive to me. And that's why. Yeah. And that, I think, can happen. It's uncomfortable. Those are uncomfortable conversations, especially with people you love, or especially with people that are coworkers or business contacts. I've had some of those in my life. I had a very, very difficult conversation with a supervisor in my job when I was a young girl. And I didn't know I was going to be working for the ADL at that time. I was 27 years old. And it was very uncomfortable for me. And then I said to the person, okay, so now you know how I feel. I don't expect you to ever use that phrase around me again. I hope you will never use that phrase. But now you know how I feel. And I'm over it. Now you understand. And that's how you let it go.
Yeah.
I think education is the key. And sometimes people don't even understand where some of these old tropes come from. Right. You know, this idea of Jewish power comes from the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. That was debunked 100 years ago.
Yeah.
These are age-old tropes. And so really understanding where to go to get a clear understanding of where this stuff comes from. At ADL, we have all kinds of literature on where these anti-Semitic tropes come from, and anybody can contact us and we'll send them. They can go online and they type up blood libel, type up Jewish power into the search bar, and they will see our guide to anti-Semitic tropes and what they mean and where they came from.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit more about education, because the scenario that you just shared, and I loved it. I thought it was a beautiful story. I think sometimes people don't have the courage to necessarily confront someone, even if it is an unconscious bias, even if it is something that is being said that they don't even know where it came from, or they think it's okay, right? And so can you give a couple more tips on when you run into somebody who is saying something or sharing a story that has an unconscious bias in it, how to approach, maybe one or two more ways on how to approach the conversation? Because I think as anybody who is a minority, I would say, and I find myself in this situation sometimes, not knowing how to bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of different ways. One is in the moment. If somebody says something, you could wince, or you could go, "Ooh, that felt bad to me." And can we talk about that? And I wouldn't ever do that in a group of 20 people. It doesn't usually help you to call out somebody, because then they get filled with bravado unless it's a celebrity and they're out there wildly and loudly, but in a small group setting, say you were at a cocktail party or something and you're in a group of 6 or 8 people, or you're in your office and they're all having coffee or having a staff meeting and somebody says something like that. Just sometimes saying, ooh, hold off. That's not cool. Or you're making me feel like I'm being targeted here. Or, and that's where allyship helps. Somebody standing up for the Jewish person or the Black person or the Asian person in the group is sometimes much easier to accept. Like, hey, please don't pick on somebody who's Asian because they didn't bring COVID-19 here.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So sometimes just right in the moment, kind of checking the information, sometimes taking them aside and saying, after the meeting and saying, I didn't stop you in there. I didn't want to embarrass you, but I really feel like you need to understand something. What you just said was unacceptable. And I think don't apologize. It's not saying something that's unacceptable is unacceptable.
Yeah.
So what you said is unacceptable. And here's why. And this is where the guide of especially about anti-Semitism, but I would say research, racism, research anti-Asian, research anti-gay. The internet is a very powerful tool for in terms of bad things and promulgating hate, but it's also a very, very good tool for getting to the heart of a matter. And I always tell people, don't listen to your friend's brother's best friend's cousin. Go to a source, go to a nonprofit organization, go to the people who know what they're talking about. So Go to the Asian Pacific Islanders website, go to the ADL, go to the ACLU, those kinds of websites that have that are not partisan or anything like that, and get the real understanding of where some of these old fashioned ideas come from. And then you can say to the person that you've heard say that, so just want you to know what you said is really a throwback from the 1800s. And I know you don't want to be living in the 1800s. I certainly don't want to be living in the 1800s. Sometimes it takes a little bit of thought, and sometimes it's not right in the moment. Sometimes it's you're thinking about it and you pull the person aside and say, I've done my research and what I felt uncomfortable yesterday when you said that in this meeting. Yeah. And here's what I've learned. And then the third way is just to bring in facts. And that is, what you said is completely wrong. That is an absolute disinformation. There's a difference between misinformation and disinformation. Somebody who's making a mistake, and maybe I quote a figure that's wrong, and I look at my paper and I've given you the wrong figure. That's a mistake, and we can live with mistakes. But if I was giving you information that I knew was not right, that's disinformation, and that's very insidious. But in the case of expecting good intent, you can go up to the person and say, what you said was factually inaccurate. The Jews did not bring the plague during the Middle Ages at all. So, and that the reason it's important, that little sort of thing is important, is because people are still blaming Jews for bringing disease into places that they have they have not brought disease. And that's where this comes from. So understanding the historic roots of some kind of ideology is really important. And I think the last thing is just letting bygones be bygone and telling the person, okay, I've said my piece. Hopefully they don't go all just, completely destructive and at you, but they could. And then you could say, okay, well, I'm sorry, but I disagree. And then walk away and then not let it bother you. Educate and assume best intent. If you find that it's not good intent, like in the case that we were talking about of Kanye West, he's doubling down. So, okay, so we're not gonna talk to Kanye West about that, because he's not gonna be a person that wants to really, make himself better or correct a wrong, and we all kind of can judge about that. Yeah. In business, I think it's really crucial to not let insidious hatred sort of creep into teams and creep into business, because it affects the bottom line.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as we are, as we are seeing and continually see more diversified boardrooms, then there needs to be more education. And what I'm hearing you very loudly is we all have a responsibility to educate ourselves. We all have the responsibility not to wait till we hear within the company that X, Y, and Z is happening, but as leaders, be proactive and reach out to organizations like the ADL and other organizations that can proactively educate people in an organization. Because I agree with you, it is yes, it is good for the bottom line, but it's really important for the human spirit. I mean, that's we're
Absolutely.
talking. This is soul work. The result may be a bottom line, but it's really about just doing what's right. So I love
I just said it better
everything.
myself, John.
I love everything that you shared today, Carolyn. If a company wants to connect with you, if a school wants to connect with you, if anybody wants to connect with you, how can they connect with you and learn more about how they can bring your No Place for Hate and any other program that the ADL offers, and maybe other organizations that you can connect them with where they also need within the walls of their business, school, or families?
I'm glad you asked that. We have a lot of partnerships. They can contact the ADL Michigan. They can contact ADL. They can contact me, cnormandin@adl.org. They can contact Michigan@adl.org. ADLmichigan.com is our website. And they can go to adl.org and say if they have an incident that they'd like to report. The second they put it in their zip code, the incident comes to me. If it's a Michigan zip code, I get it, and my team reviews it. And then we try and make things happen in a good way going forward. I think the most important thing is this is a situation and an issue that we really, as a country, need to grapple with. As a state, we need to grapple with. The last thing I'll say is Michigan over-indexes in anti-Semitic incidents for our population. We're a very large state, but last year we had 112 incidents of anti-Semitism only, just anti-Semitism, and that was tied with Texas. And so that kind of gives you an indication that we're in a very dubious club here in Michigan, and I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it get abated a little bit. I don't think I'm working myself out of a job anytime soon, but we're always working towards standing up against hate. And I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. I appreciate all the work that you and everybody in your organization does. And we'll have you on some more. The recent news it just brought to light what is happening. And it's not just today or within the last week. And so we'll keep these conversations going. We'll incorporate and maybe have additional people with you as guests from other organizations, because it's good for the human soul. And it's important. So Carolyn, I really appreciate Think Community. If Carolyn and the ADL can help you, please reach out and give them your contact information one more time.
So michigan.adl.org and C. Normandin, Carolyn Normandin, C. Normandin @adl.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carolyn. I appreciate you. Thanks.